Let me join Raman in welcoming everyone here. These last 2 years have been such a blank, and so it's good to see people show up for events like this. I had the privilege of coming across this book just around the time that it was released, and that's when we kind of got to discuss it, go back to his older stories, and see how they worked out into this book collection. So, I mean, the book, as it says, is despite the state, why India lets the people down and how they cope. Uh, I don't need to promote it anymore. Third print mein chal raha hai, so I'm sure it's doing well. Not enough people in Sikkim might still have read it, but I think it's an essential read because I thought I'll open with this quote from his book that I've taken, which I will resonate with, I think, everyone out here. So he writes, self-interested political parties entirely unable to deal with the challenges before their state hid their failure through denial, diversion, leadership cults, and endorsement from others. Now, tell us about it. It's because although he focuses on these 6 states that he covers, which are Mizoram, Odisha, Punjab, uh, Gujarat, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu, to cover this central theme that he has, is because all of these stories, even when they are full of these anecdotes which are very unique to those locations, tell a wider story which apply to any of us. These are experiences that all of us have seen it in Sikkim, or if you are from Darjeeling or Kalimpong, at a more stronger level in those areas, or anywhere in the country, if we go, we see all of this happening. What we have not been able to figure out is like how have these things happened? I mean, what is the main failure here? So we'll get into that also a bit later. I mean, he calls it democratic policy, this failure of democracy and the governments in looking after the citizens or looking out for their interests, at least in things that they've signed on for, like building schools but not providing them with enough teachers. And like I was telling him earlier, just today we've run a story on that about a school in not very far from Gangtok, where a night guard is taking the mathematics classes, the peon is taking geography lessons, and an office assistant is a class teacher of grade 4. So it's not like we have a shortage of teachers. So these problems that arise, how coteries work, crony capitalism, and things like that. This book is littered with those stories. It is not all desolate, hopefully. Maybe there'll be some solutions that we can get into. So to get into this discussion that we're planning, first of all, thanks.
For what?
Thanks for joining us here today.
No, the pleasure is
Even if
all
you're
mine.
flogging the book, it's still, these are interesting discussions.
No, the pleasure is all mine. I mean, this is my first physical launch.
Oh, yeah, and yes, his book was launched online. So,
Yeah, so I'm
Sikkim
very
has
happy
the,
about that.
has the honor of having actually.
I would walk 10 kilometers carrying that carton of books, honestly.
You had already done the reports, right? This book is essentially kind of based on the reportage that you did over 33 months in 6 states, which was serialized in Scroll. And how many crazy number of stories that you filed for Scroll under the Ear to the Ground series?
A total of 120 reports.
But anyway, so you had already done 120 reports from these areas. And in your introduction, you mentioned that you were almost vehemently opposed to the idea that kitab nahi nikalna hai iska. So first tell us why the book then. I mean, after this report, as 120 reports had already been done, you had won all the awards that are possible for these, then why the book?
Okay, so first of all, I'm really glad to be here. And a big hello to everyone. Like I said, this is the first actual physical launch of the book. And I'm very glad it's happening here in Gangtok.
The one state you didn't visit.
Yeah, so there was a time when I was wondering which northeast state to pick up, right?
Yeah.
So then I went with Mizoram. And a friend just called and she was saying, "Oh, Shekhar, after having traveled through multiple armpits of the country, you now landed in a nice place." So I was like, "Yeah, well." So 120 reports, right? Out of those, I think about 70. So start breaking it up. So 33 months, 120 reports, roughly one every week. But a bunch of those are fairly quick opinion pieces and things like that. So let's take those out. Maybe the investigative stories, right, would be around 77, if I remember correctly. And typically, the definition of an investigative story is it doesn't have to be some Herculean effort, really, okay? If I talk to one person and write a report, it is stenography. The moment I talk to one more person to check what the first person told me, I'm entering investigative reporting, right? And subsequently a third and a fourth and a fifth and whatever. But I suppose about 77 involved bringing out relatively fresh information about these states. Um, I think there were two reasons why I didn't want to do a book. Okay, the first is um, that the time that I would need to put into writing a book would be about a year. It would probably reach 3,000 or 4,000 people at the end of it, right? As opposed to taking those 12 months and writing, let's say, even 12 really solid investigative reports, right? The quantum of new information produced is greater if I don't do the book, right? So that is how the thinking went at the time. Um, so the reporting project ended. Uh, by that time, I was completely burned out. I was like, अब जो भी करना है करेंगे, लेकिन I don't want to read anything more on India for some time. So I went on a reading break. And in the reading break, you are also. So the first 3 months of the reading break were pure reading for pleasure. So I was reading on insect societies, whatever, because your brain again needs nourishment. We cannot keep giving the brain only serious stuff, important stuff, uh, stuff that is sort of soul squashing to 10 degrees. Every once in a while, the brain also needs an injection of wonderment. You know. So after 33 months of moving through this and getting a really close look at a lot of journalism engages with fairly ugly processes. Okay. Um, I had done a report on illegal sand mining in Tamil Nadu. And reporting on that had taken about 2 months. Uh, one interesting question came out after another, and finally putting all those pieces together, uh, it was stimulating and challenging and fun. But the moment the final report was done, I felt low. And I couldn't figure out why. At one level, it doesn't feel like you've discovered something which is um anything but banal. Okay. And I was talking to V. Geeta, and I asked her, Geeta, it's a strange thing. I've worked so hard on this report, and the report is done. I've sent it off to the editors, and I don't feel relief. I just feel a kind of tiredness, and I feel low. And she said, because of the banality of evil. What you found at the end of it all is a very petty thought. Right? Contracts are being gamed, money is being made, the ecology is getting hammered. So, a lot of journalism is like this. It takes a toll. So, at the end of the reporting project, I went on this break. For 3 months, I just read just to sort of, re-stimulate the brain into being a little more curious and relaxed about itself. You know? And then there were all these strange patterns that I had been seeing while traveling in these states, 6 very different states. But all of them similar in some very striking ways. Each of them completely failing to deliver health, education, and justice. Right? Each of them seeing a small set of people close to the ruling party gaining much more than others. Each of them seeing very strong centralization of power with the chief minister's office. Each of them seeing a strange resurgence of both religious identity or caste identity. You know? And this didn't really make sense to me because why are 6 states, entirely different economic structures, social structures, civil society structures, different political parties in power, why are all of them behaving in the same way? So then I began reading a little more. Bauman is quoted a lot in the book, right? Bauman, Todorov, etc. And out of that, um, it's like at one level you see a lot of messiness, right? And then you put a little abstraction on top of it and you go higher and look at what you're seeing. putting a more analytic framework, etc. And you start understanding linkages between all of these things that you're seeing. And that is when I thought that there is really a book.
Yeah.
So that's the.
I mean, I'm glad he thought there was a book because scroll में 120 आर्टिकल कौन पढ़ेगा जाके फिर से वापस. So this is a
क्यों पढ़ सकते हैं यार, ऐसा भी नहीं है.
नहीं यार, आजकल ना ट्विटर से ज़्यादा कोई नहीं पढ़ता है. Facebook post भी first paragraph and people are done with this. I mean, I was
Also,
just
there's
wondering.
one more thing, okay, which is that when you look at the way the scroll articles are written, right? Scroll might be more readable than most publications, but still, there is something about the way in which the average journalistic article is structured, which is still not very readable. You know, so one of the things when I started work on the book, so the first thing you have to do is you have to get the tone right. So what they say is that the first draft of the book you write is for yourself. I gave that to the publisher, and the publisher said, the ideas are decent, lekin the way you've written it is not going to work, you have to write again. So then I had this really godforsaken phase where for a while they said that, to make it more interesting, write it as a travelogue. And then I tried to channel my inner Douglas Adams. And two of those drafts, and the publishers were looking a little panicky ki, my God, kisko sign kar liya hum logon ne? Because this book is going to be a clunker. And then Kartika said something which was very interesting. She said that, look, just because you got 80,000 words, it doesn't mean that you tell us how you reached your conclusions. Don't bring the facts and the process of arriving at those facts into the book at all. Start with the conclusions and tell the story from there. Right? And so the book is actually way more readable than the articles for that reason, because it doesn't follow those forms that journalism is forced to follow, which, like an investigative story on a company, will necessarily have a lot of numbers in it, right? And they actually take away from readability of the news report in any case. So that was one of my learnings in terms of.
I mean, I'm sure Anurag will love you for what you just said. Anurag is like a book editor, so.
That's why he's smiling more than everyone else. Okay.
So writers kind of respecting what the editors have to comment would go down with him. So I mean, before we get on to the other stuff, so how much of work did it take? Like when you're talking about like you did the first draft and then you went back, and so what are we looking at? Like how many? Or was there any? There wouldn't be a substantial shift in the what you were trying to say, I guess. It's in the how.
It's in the how.
So what is that process like? If you could just kind of.
So I got the book deal. Then I went back to Bangalore and I tried out the first 5,000 words in the new woke voice. The editors were psyched out. So I came back and I tried again. And then the second time the editors psyched me out. Okay. Raj, this is not really working. And then I stopped writing. Then I took a step back, because the worst thing you can do is keep yammering away trying to get this right. So I stopped writing. I went back. See, the thing is this. One other reason why I didn't want to do a book is because I thought that a book needs to have a coherent question when you start off. Right? Despite this, Ear to the Ground never had a coherent question when it started. It was simply to say that, look, I don't understand what's happening in this country anymore. I'm going to go take a look. Which means that the reports are necessarily very dispersed and diffuse.
Stories as you get.
Right. Which also means that you may not have a unifying enough thread to put it together as a book. That thread came after the reading, that analytic frame, right? Now when the process time to write came, suddenly I find that, I cannot really do a travelogue, because in the middle of my travels and reporting, all my attention has been so focused on listening to what this person is telling me, that I have very successfully managed to not notice what that person looks like, is wearing, the room where we are having this conversation. I'm focusing only on it's a whistle-stop tour of the country. So I'm trying to get the essence of that conversation and then move on. I won't have the luxury of meeting this person a second and a third time, right? So suddenly I realized I cannot do a travelogue. I have no color, right? So, and yet this needs to be told in a slightly interesting manner, right? So what I did is I took this break from writing. I went and I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, his non-fiction, Scandal of the Century. And Scandal of the Century is a good book to read because he was a reporter, but he had this gift of being able to look tangentially at things. You know, so if he's writing about salaries not coming to employees on time, he's not going to do the cliched thing, charged in for 4 weeks, this guy's family has not been able to buy milk because of, salaries not coming kind of a thing. He will just take a slightly different frame and bring you into the story. So I read some of that stuff and then I tried to create narrative arcs for every chapter. I know what I want to say at the end of the Mizoram chapter. I want to say that here is a state which is in the throes of a cash flow crisis, right? So if I look at all of my notes, I can say that, okay, maybe I should lead off that chapter with the anecdote about this one person and then keep take that initial anecdote, go on to the next anecdote saying that, okay, this guy is not making money from his business. He's not the only one struggling, others are struggling too. And it's not only businessmen who are struggling, government employees are not getting paid either. And so advance the story in chunks of 1,000 words, 1,500 words, whatever. And the narrative arc got created. And once you create the narrative arc, then it becomes easier for subsequent chapters.
Okay. Returning to the book for a bit here, you mentioned that what you noticed in all these states was the centralization of power around the CMO, right? We see that at the national level and at the state level as well. So, from all your visits and all your discussions with these people, do you think that's a recent phenomena, or is that how it's always been, and you just managed to kind of capture it at this moment?
I think it's intensified over time.
As democracy has weakened, or our ideas of it, which is what the book is.
So what you're seeing is, and different states have evolved at different speeds, or evolved not in a progressive sense, but just changed over time at different speeds, right? So Tamil Nadu under Jayalalitha became a very centralized state much before other parts of the country. So how would she work? She had all the power with her. The MLAs would be basically, prostrating themselves in front of her, entirely at her mercy. And she would work through 5 or 6 chosen bureaucrats. Right? Then that model got picked up by, say, people like Naveen Patnaik. Gradually, you find that other power centers in the BJD got whittled out, got forced out. At one time, the BJD had people like Damodar Raut, Pyarimon Mahapatra, a bunch of strong leaders. Gradually, the MLAs became dispensable entities. Right? And one thing that made it possible is the rise of these very, very fiercely loyal bureaucrats who are now working on the assumption that my career growth will not be determined by how my appraisals within the bureaucracy go. I will rise along with this politician. The Gujarat guys have followed that model. So that's
that's replicating everywhere. We've seen that
increasingly now, right?
So I'm wondering. So what do you think it is?
Sorry, go on.
Okay.
No.
No, I was wondering whether, for example, were these states consciously replicating that model, or because it would be really scary if this is the organic way in which democracy is supposed to kind of get into our lives. So, how do you think it worked? They saw that, okay, I want to be Jayalalitha, and I'm going to work towards that. So, whether in Punjab, we see the same thing happen.
So there is this little subgenre of development reporting, right? Where we talk about this promising initiative by this state government was then picked up and replicated at scale nationally, right? Asha came from Chhattisgarh, right? Midday meal came from Tamil Nadu. And that's one way in which learnings move. Think of India as, say, multiple democracies, not just one large democracy. Each of these states has its own trajectory. Uh, so you have one set of lessons rippling through from one state to the other, but the political leaders are doing something similar as well. They're also learning from each other. So what you have is a Naveen Patnaik consciously modeling his welfare initiatives on what Tamil Nadu does, right? Um, in terms of giving similar freebies and so on and so forth. Uh, Bureaucrats playing a particular kind of a role where politicians don't really always know how to break these systems. They need someone who's going to tell them कि sir आप इसको ऐसे करो, right? That's where these guys come in. And there was a policeman in Gujarat who summed it up perfectly. He called it anticipatory psychophancy. You know that I want to rise. Uh, I'm going to try and do whatever it takes to make my CM look good, and I'm going to ascend. So, and again, I'm not going to be completely serious through this conversation. Okay, it's late in the evening, and my brain has maxed out being serious. But you imagine my mental state. Okay, Mizoram was great fun. But from Mizoram, I went to Odisha, where I was left with reverberating shock. Uh, and then I went from there to Punjab, where I was like, the whole state public health system doesn't have a single cardiologist. You know, because of something called foregone revenue. The political party is sucking out so much money from the economy that there isn't enough money left for the people of the state. Right? And this needs to be conceptualized and thought about in a particular way. So, 1 year of the project, I've seen a cash flow crisis in Mizoram, and I've seen all the gains from the iron ore boom in Orissa going to roughly 50 families, with the cascading costs on the rest of the people in the state. Punjab has been stressful in its own way. And then I think, chalo koi baat nahi, I'm going to Tamil Nadu, where the government systems work really well. I'm going to bulk up on my reservoirs of hope once again. And then I realized in Tamil Nadu that a particularly Anthu Cutlet education secretary has begun manipulating exam statistics to make it look like the state is enormously improving in education delivery. And I suppose there are two things to be said there. And how do you know that they're manipulating the exam results, the school board results? Partly because if you look at the Tamil state, which has irrigated agriculture, Punjab, and then two states which are relatively industrialized. So Tamil Nadu in the south, Gujarat in the west. We kept Gujarat for the end because it was a hunch that these processes we are seeing, they've been playing out the longest in Gujarat, right? So it sort of seemed to make sense to go there right at the end. And that is how this was conceptualized, pitched. And again, the secret is to catch scroll at a vulnerable moment too. Right?
Yeah,
Which is how it works.
Yeah, yeah. They've got this whole series. It, so this story is, I mean, the book is primarily about how the state is, how India has failed its people, and of course that's a kind of that's how we feel democracy, or whichever way you want to look at it. Your introduction, that's for the audience here that might not have read the book yet, obviously not read the book yet, is in the introduction you kind of give us this course of democracy, let's say, right? In like at the time of independence, when there was idealism and the incentives were different for our political leaders, the kind of collaborations that were created. So you do that with Amul, right? Which I think is a very interesting way to kind of put this whole process of how things have worked out for India. So one, I'm not questioning the choice. It's very interesting. I think you should kind of just tell the audience about how that works, how you've picked up Amul to show us the graph of democracy and politics, rather, in our country, and why Amul? Why did you choose that as a, not really a metaphor, but like as a living example of all that is us?
Why Amul is very easily answered because the start I wanted was shot down by the editor.
Tell us that also.
Okay, so I'm assuming everyone here knows what Amul is, right? So the fun thing about going into every state, not having already decided what you're going to find, is that you are ambushed almost immediately. The people you meet will tell you things which you hadn't imagined were possible, right? So I would keep thinking कि at the end of the day कि यार आज तो दिमाग पूरा format हो गया. What did I hear? What is happening? So when I went to Gujarat, early meetings, okay, I was talking to people to get an overview of big changes they see in the state, etc. And one of them said, Amul is now completely controlled by the BJP. Now we know that this history has played out in Maharashtra and UP, right? Cooperatives have been taken over Sharad Pawar and company very famously. But it still sort of comes as a shock because Amul has been, it followed a similar trajectory as the rest of the country, right? India at the time of independence, okay, no. So just think of Amul at the time of independence. It was a deeply idealistic project. It was saying that, look, the problems we face as a society and as a country are age-old problems. Poverty is hardwired into this country right now. Can we attack poverty through a mix of organizational innovation, cooperatives, and science, milk chillers, whatever it is, right? It was an idealistic undertaking. India itself was a very idealistic undertaking, right? You take one of the most unequal societies in the world and you say that we are going to use the instrument of a constitutional democracy to make everybody an equal citizen. It's a very romantic idea, right? And what happened in the case of Amul is that the initial founders were all Gandhians. Amul genuinely was made to work for local development. The Gandhians got old. And the second generation of leaders that came in were people who, so every district in Gujarat has one Amul dairy, right? And as the Gandhians' time came to an end, around the 80s, 70s, a bunch of regional satraps came up. And the regional satraps were people who did not have political ambition, but they wanted to control the district. And what they began doing is, and they figured that, look, the biggest economic engine in my district is the Amul dairy. I want to control this. And they began manipulating elections, etc., etc., and they came to power. And once they come to power, they use the dairy basically to make sure that they never lose power thereafter, right? So, which means that you will give contracts to some of your people so that they will have money to sort of bankroll you during the next elections or whatever. And then around the late 90s, politicians began realizing that dairies can be a great source of patronage and getting votes. And the kind of compromises and weaknesses that the regional satraps had introduced into the cooperative made it easier for the politicians to enter. And what you have now is extraordinary. I picked up the financials of the biggest Amul dairy, Banaskantha, to take a look. right? Um, and you find that if it was not for dividends coming from Amul, the dairy would be loss making in 9 out of 10 years. That is what had happened to its financial strength, right? In a sense, what you saw was a small crisis of this capture by satraps, setting the stage for a larger capture, or a small crisis leading to a larger crisis, or a small capture leading to a larger capture, which is kind of similar to what we are seeing in India right now. The rot in this country starts um, with uh, the social contract between political parties and the people changing to one of a kleptocracy. Right? That kleptocracy makes people disillusioned with democracy itself and sets the stage for this larger crisis that we face today. People swing away. People sort of uh, say that sab chor hain, we want a strong leader. Enter Modi. So it's the same story in that sense. Uh, a small set of erosions go unnoticed, then look, there is nothing happening in Delhi today which the states haven't seen yet already. Right? All of these erosions in all of these states, when states have been jailing reporters for a really long time. Right? Nobody has made a fuss about it. So I was in Tamil Nadu, writing on the sand mining thing, and that was the time when Kannaiah had been um, beaten up in jail. And one sand mining activist told me, he said, look, you're talking about Kannaiah, right? That stuff has been happening here for 20 years now. So a lot of these smaller erosions took place. They went unchallenged. And now a larger crisis has used those openings to sort of uh, capitalize.
Yeah. I mean, that's a nice kind of place to segue into. If you could, you mentioned something like clientelism is what the politicians, the politicians in power have kind of resorted to. How? So, how would you kind of define it? And if you could share some examples from the book of what you've seen, because then we can draw parallels. Okay, ये तो मैंने भी देखा है यहाँ पे types.
Okay, so
And also, was that something that you already had an inkling of, or was it something you discovered while you were out there reporting?
totally discovered. Okay, so um, let's just sort of go back to where I was at the end of the Punjab reporting. Uh, what are we seeing? We are seeing, like I was saying earlier, states are failing to deliver health, education, justice. People close to the political party are gaining much more than others in the state. Centralization of political power. A bunch of these are decisions taken by political parties. Right? So, sorry, a lot of foregone revenue. So, let's say 4 traits in common in the first 3 states I've been to. All of these, what is common between all 4 of these traits is that these are decisions taken by political party leaders, right? And so, by the end of the Tamil Nadu section, and later yet, a couple of things. So, as the project evolved, a couple of things became very, very evident. So, for a person who has worked as a business reporter, we are taught to study institutions in terms of their qualities and traits. There is a particular mystification that happens of political parties and political leaders, right? Let's strip that mystification away and look at a political party as a institution like any other, right? It's a better way to understand them. So, if you look at the traits of a political party that I was seeing, they were all extractive. Extractive political institutions are ones which pull out money from the public good or the public purse for their own operations, right? They were increasingly centralized. Power had eddied with one or two people. And this is true for every single party you care to name. Uh, they were clientelistic. Clientelism means that they are offering benefits disproportionately to their followers to win votes. Okay, so for them, it doesn't matter if the state is weak at welfare delivery because the state will end up serving everybody equally. The political party promises can be more sharply targeted. And this is a point we'll come back to later because technology now plays a role here. Uh, and and the fourth trait that all these parties had in common was that of dominance. So systems theory has this notion that a strong system will always try to take over weaker systems and instrumentalize them to bend them to its own uses, really. BJP captures Amul so that it can use Amul to make the BJP better off. Right? So I was seeing these four traits repeating in state after state. And obviously, each of these comes with large costs, right? An extractive political institution is basically going to make sure that there's not enough money left for developmental functions. Punjab illustrates this perfectly. Um, I said that the state didn't have a single cardiologist. It didn't have a single doctor for kidney ailments, no neurosurgeons. And the reason was that the max salary they could offer a neurosurgeon or a cardiologist was 40,000 rupees. Why is it 40,000? And this is where logic comes in, right? Why is it 40,000 rupees? Because the state health budget is not, cannot pay more than this. Why isn't the state budget more? Because if the liquor trade in Punjab is 10,000 crores, the state is collecting only 5,000 crores. The rest is going directly to the Akali Dal. Right? Or if stone crushing is a 10,000 crore industry, none of that is coming to the state. It's going directly to the Akali Dal. You know, and these two, if you were to add up all the foregone revenues in a Punjab, the state's budget would rise from 40,000 crores to 80,000 crores a year. Extractive. Clientelism basically means that in this state, let's take Mizoram as a better example. I can happily keep coming back to power focusing only on the Mizos. I don't have to care how the Chakmas and the Lai and the Mara and the Bru are doing. Right? What the government is doing with the Muslims right now. If you look at dominant, if you look at centralized, one problem with a centralized sarkar is that checks and balances within the party itself wither away. Nobody can challenge the leader, right? So uncontrolled power. And the problem with dominance, external watchdogs, they shut down as well. So you have a very unaccountable government. It's often also a very insecure government. So Tamil Nadu, for example, it had zero patience for any criticism of the government. Okay, so Kovan sang a song and he was sent to jail and slapped with sedition. Right? So we could argue that therefore Tamil Nadu is a hard state. But there was also something really weird happened where there's a groundwater crisis in Tamil Nadu. So there is a new model groundwater bill which says that the minimum distance between groundwater bores should be at least 5 kilometers if the bore is more than a kilometer deep, etc. So the state government passed that act and then withdrew it, saying that if we enforce this act, there will be a public outcry. Which is a weird kind of rationale. It's the rationale of a very frightened government. Right? You're very afraid of losing popularity and legitimacy. And somehow both of these realities coexist. You're a hard state and you are a phenomenally frightened little Sarkar. And there is a book called Wood Smoke and Leaf Cups, where Madhu Ramnath lived with a tribe in Bastar for 30 years. Okay, and it's the first book I have read which tells me how tribals of central India look at the world around them. Okay, and the Durva, the tribe, has a saying. There are three roles of the Sarkar. It begs, it orders, it makes the heart ache. You know, and that line blows me because it's kind of summing up what so many political theorists have taken books to say, right? So, anyway, now I'm rambling.
No, no. I mean, like that's what kind of comes out in the book because I mean, sitting as we do in Sikkim, we've always complained about these paradrop journalists. कुछ हो गया तो आते हैं and then they'll talk to 10 people and go back and file a report. But when we come across like detailed stuff like this, long form, and with a lot of background research, you say, okay, we need this perspective as well. Because what happens in this book is that these are all familiar stories, right, to all of us. I mean, any of these stories, what you talk about the state and the political parties. But these dots have, like, working here, we're not connecting those dots and linking back to, okay, यार वहाँ पे भी ऐसा ही हो रहा है. These are possibly the central decisions made in Delhi which have led to a similar situation in Sikkim. Most of the stuff you write about Mizoram or Odisha, for instance, it might be mining in Odisha, it's idle projects in Sikkim. Education is equally ill served. Up to Tamil Nadu ka bhi we find echoes. We've been finding them in Sikkim for about 3 decades now. So, but before I get into the next question that we can discuss, it is about also this. You get into a bit about, I mean, what can only be called the fiction of development, right? Where the Sarkar says, okay, this is going to deliver us. And the people get crumbs at most if they get anything. What you talked about, what Punjab was doing. And the pie, of course, goes to a very select few hands. Now, I'm wondering, like, these are not secrets, right? I mean, it's not like you dug up this new piece of information. The people that you speak to have experienced it, they've seen it, which is why they can share it with you, these experiences that they have had. How are they negotiating with it? Apart from just suffering it and, अरे क्या करें ऐसा ही है. Do you see any?
No, I think there are two things to be said there. I think, you know, dispossession and loot are not always easy to spot. Harder to figure because the language is different, the instruments and institutions are different, but the essential characteristics of the trade haven't changed too much. Right? What we are getting in India today now is that there are some forms of plunder that all of us are able to spot, and we get angry about them, right? But there are so many other ways in which society is looted, which are harder to figure out. Out-of-pocket expenditure on healthcare in Sikkim is rising. You will not directly link it to government policies which are underfunding healthcare, forcing you to put money into this, right? And that is what the press has to do in terms of connecting these dots. So the problem with journalism, of many problems with journalism, is that it works in silos. So there is one reporter who is going to come in and write about the Badal business complex and say that, देखो यार उनका business जो है कितना बढ़ गया है. End of the story. Another reporter goes and looks at very poor health, let's say healthcare understaffing in Punjab. But these two are directly related, right? And those linkages are not getting drawn well enough, and therefore, a lot of this disposition, or the fact that it is the creation of decisions taken by the Sarkar of the time, isn't something that we realize, and so parties get away with it. So that's one thing that I really wanted to say, that um, I think our capacity. I think these guys have gotten really good at hiding their trails. We haven't been good, and we are all struggling to keep pace with this rising complexity through which these disempowering processes work. Right? Uh, this world is an entirely transnational world. You know, he's telling us to shut up.
No.
You might think that the hydel projects coming up in Sikkim are a local problem, but the money coming into these is anything but local. It's not even national, right? And how does a subnational or a national newsroom engage with what is fundamentally a transnational process, right? So you're automatically hamstrung. And those are and the question is one of newsroom capacity. What is your capacity to make sense of this ongoing movement? If you don't have it, you will end up again with a limited understanding of this thing.
Yeah, and that's. Do you have any hope of that happening? Do you think we can pull it off? Like putting things in context, connecting these dots, and I mean, do you
Yeah,
see that
of course.
happening? Do you see that happening enough?
I'm deeply hopeful. See,
आपने तो किताब लिख दिया है. I'm talking
हाँ,
about the
I know.
general scene.
No, so I'll tell you why. Okay. Um, it will take a person maybe 2 years to engineer the perfect scam, right? Uh, journalism is the concentrated application of attention for a shorter amount of time. And there's nothing as powerful as full-blown investigative reporting to figure out what is going on at the first level. Uh, and it's got this range of instruments, right? Off the record conversations, theory, secondary data, sources, whatever you want to use to sort of try and figure out what's going on. And the thing is that if I can prove one instance of fraud, that's enough to invalidate the entire, to expose the entire process or invalidate the entire decision making process which took place. So there's a chain in which a scam takes place. All I have to do is basically focus on one part of that thing. I don't have to do the whole thing. In the coal scam, there was corruption. I don't have to prove corruption in all 320 coal block allocations. I can focus on one particularly egregious case and say that there was a money trail in this, and if there was a money trail in this, it stands to reason that there might have been money trails elsewhere too. Right? And what you see in India, therefore, is it's a cat and mouse game. These guys take a step ahead. We learn, we come closer, they move another step ahead. Right now, they're at the. So at one time, the politicians used to take shares in companies, used to take bribes, right? Then they said कि यार वो एडवांस में 4 लाख लिया लेकिन फिर उसकी कंपनी 1,000 करोड़ की हो गई और फिर मुझे कुछ नहीं मिला काइंड ऑफ अ थिंग दे बिगैन टेकिंग इक्विटी then we figured that they have started taking equity and we began writing all these reports. Reporters started writing about how ex-politician has shares in this company, right? Then they changed their game and they began using proxies, right? So Nitin Gadkari's driver suddenly turned out to be a director on 10 different companies, right? So you figured that. Then those guys went in for the sleeping partner model, which is what is in use in China right now, where you float a company. I have nothing to do with this, but it's tacitly understood between you and me that 30% of the company belongs to me, right? Now I cannot prove your link. This link cannot be proved easily, but there is still that bit of money needing to flow from me to you, right? And so it's that ongoing game, right?
So, which brings me to the other rank that we have as journalists is okay, you do all this, but apart from like some agencies or some political parties picking up a story and then running with it and leading it to some accountability, some level of accountability. But that's not what we are always writing for. We are writing for the lay readers. Do you think there is enough response or reaction from our readers, like let's say with your stories, uh, to these issues, and or is it a slow process? Right, it's a drip, drip, drip thing. We are kind of informing people better, hoping someday they make the right decisions and things like that. And linked to that would be the other question about the 6 days that you write about. How do these stories get read by them as well? Like, apart from, of course, anyone can log in to scroll and read it, buy the book. But do you also ever make a conscious effort कि okay यार ये कहानी मिजोरम के
So,
लोकल पेपरों में भी छपना चाहिए भाई? And I completely get that we don't have a conscious format in our minds कि भाई एक story निकलेगा उसके बाद कल ये response होगा उसका. But do you see enough happening?
no, I don't see enough happening. And I think the problem lies sizably in us. When does news travel? News travels when you tell people something that they genuinely want to know. Right? My Amul stories, they did not travel in Gujarat. Why? They already know this is happening.
Yeah, they're living it.
Right. So, in that sense, it might be a good report for the rest of the Janta, but for the affected population, it's pedestrian work. Right? Which are the stories that really traveled? Jaisha traveled, Loya traveled. Right? So, the thing is also this again, it's very hard to belong to the time we live in. What are the questions of this moment that people are wondering about? It's so easy for me to sort of come in, decide a priori, ki, oh, Sikkim, I must write on hiding. Right? Maybe the locals have other questions, and that is where the effort is needed to understand what it is that they're really trying to figure. In the case of Mizoram, once we established that money trail between the CM's brother and road contracts going to companies outside the state, the local press picked up that report, translated it into Mizo, and published it. Right? I think our struggle is to come as close as we can to what is this particular movement. If I find the right question, and that is effort, right? It's not serendipity. If I work long enough to find the right question, my assumption is that that story will travel. But like you were saying about paratroop reporters, right? Now look at the tragedy of this. Uh, First of all, reporters don't really get to travel at all now, right? When they are allowed to travel, then they are told, okay, now you can go to Bihar for this encephalitis outbreak, but we need you to file quickly because we want to be first with the story than the other chaps. If you're told to send in your report within 2 days, what it means is that you will go with a particular narrative structure for the story already in your head. It will correspond to similar encephalitis outbreaks you've seen in other parts of the country or whatever. You will do the thing of talking to the doctor, the patient, someone else, and filling it up. In the process, you might actually miss the specific local reasons for that outbreak. So, therefore, it's possible to go reporting and still be out of touch because you haven't been able to spend enough time figuring out the nuances of this particular case. So that's what I think, that if we are able to sort of either we find that question that people are wondering about, it'll travel. Scenario two, how well are we able to explain the ramifications of the specific plunder that we are seeing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, now I think we're kind of now on the final stages. What I was also thinking is, you like you explained earlier about the book and the series as well, that you went to these states to understand India, right? How what was happening to our country. A very superficial read of this book right? I'm not saying in any way that is the thing that I got, but a very superficial read of this book would suggest that कि भाई the federal system is collapsing, ये states सब बकवास हैं, right? The states are all failing, so hence we need a strong central, which is how we've been voting, right, for the parliament. Do you think? I mean, not that it's a reading of this book, but do you think that that is really manifesting, and if there is any uh, other ways around it? Because with a strong center, like you said, that says on cow protection, what was it in Punjab?
Gaushala.
Gaushala thing. We saw that in Sikkim as well. This is that what you said, anticipatory psychophancy. It's, I mean, we see around us is actually competitive psychophancy. यार
Yeah.
इसने नमस्ते किया मेरे को तो पाँव छूना पड़ेगा and then कल कोई जूता change कर देगा types scenario में पहुंच गए. So what we had in Sikkim is, for instance, I'll just give you an
It
example.
has its comic moments.
Yeah, so in Sikkim what happened is like the cow slaughter was always banned, for instance, right? था Sikkim में perhaps. Beef eating doesn't mean गाय खाते हैं.
Right.
Right? We eat the male bovine primarily. So cow slaughter was from the king's time. There is an order somewhere which says cows will not be slaughtered and eaten or whatever. But then Delhi में change हो गया सब कुछ तो अब सबको दिखाना है कुछ करना है तो the last government actually passed a fresh bill in the assembly banning cow slaughter, which was already banned in Sikkim. And the only way I could read it is कि ये तो भाई press release दिल्ली को भेजना है कि see हम लोग भी line में लग गए हैं, like we also support your. So what I was getting at is that how would you counter that argument that this book is essentially you're taking the hammer to the federal, ये regional satraps बन के तो ऐसे ही होगा देश का हाल types.
I think what I say is that the dysfunction we see at the state level has not reached the center. And what you're seeing at the center is what you've seen already the state. So in that sense, the center doesn't have any answers. It is just playing out the same sclerosis on a national scale. What you need is a different kind of a reconstruction. Right? The problem lies with the political parties. What the political parties are becoming. How the social contract between them and the people is changing. So I don't think I'm in that sense, I'm not criticizing how the state is functioning as much as I'm talking about the kleptocratic capture of the state. Right? And that capture of the state is also happening at the central government level. I was writing a profile of Gautam Adani when I was in ET. And there was a prof in Harvard who had said that, what you're seeing in Gujarat is something like the rent sharing model, where the government will give disproportionate benefits to one business group. That business group will naturally be supremely competitive compared to its industry rivals. Industry rivals will die out. This guy will enjoy, therefore, supernormal profits. A part of the supernormal profits will come back to the political party. Right? So the rent sharing model. An extractive political institution paired with an extractive economic institution. Which is what we are seeing. We saw this at the state level. In Mizoram, you had road contracts going to 2 or 3 companies. Local guys just wiped out. And those guys would give money to the politicians. What you see in Delhi between Adani and Modi is exactly the same. Right? So that is where I would take this. And I think our problem has been that we do not recognize exactly what we have become. We carry this idealized notion of a democracy in our heads. And we keep sort of saying, हाँ, politicians तो पैसा बनाते हैं. But what that is telling us is that a lot of these are very kleptocratic regimes. And we need a different grammar for this. Without that, we can... Look, if you're not able to name what... It's like Harry Potter, right? If you're not able to name the thing that is haunting you, you don't really have much of a chance of understanding what is going on either.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to...
I also read Harry Potter in that reading break.
Yeah. So, I mean, which kind of brings me to my final question, and then we can take some from the audiences. So, you've identified the problems and explained many of them as well. But a bimari to pata chal gaya, like you said, if you can't name what is haunting you, is what would you? I mean, I know these are not easy questions, and like we can't really arrive at a solution like that. But in your mind, from your travels, from your writing, and the amount of time you spent thinking about these issues, where do you think the solutions lie? Or if that is like too grand an ambition, then where do we begin? Like
I think
trying to
your
set things right.
only hope is to sort of insist on better adherence to democratic principles, right? So the in the case of Sikkim, the Hagel problem is not a problem of the Lepchas alone, right? Uh, it's a thing about solidarity and vigilance. You have to keep an eye on the state, how it's treating other people in this country, right? And uh, and you have to stand for everyone. I mean, the only answer has to be, I don't think there are alternatives to democracy in that sense. It is the fairest, it's not really the fair. A democracy is the best way of finding answers to complex problems, right? I mean, I read a fair bit of, I read some Chinese history every once in a while. And one of the striking things about that country is that, they spot a problem and then they try to solve it in this very authoritarian manner. And most of the time, they end up going off on some incredible tangent, uh, which makes things far worse. If societies are complex systems, you also need fairly complicated, nuanced governance systems for them in terms of finding answers to problems. And a democracy is such an instrument. What we have to do, and this is very fashionable to keep mocking democracy for everything, but what we really need to do is to sort of protect it better, to not take it for granted. And remember that, rights, right? Rights are there to be used. So, freedom of speech should be used, the freedom of the press should be used. The press lost this battle the moment it let all those claims about the Gujarat model become perception without testing it once. You know? So I think rights, I mean, you have to use the rights you have while you have them, or you run the risk of losing them.
Yeah, now the discussion is, I mean, at least the leaders are increasingly talking about responsibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, that scares me when every leader says, "Ki bhai, rights come with responsibilities," and like individual rights should just be free. Uh,
And the answer to that is to ask different questions. You know, um, I was talking to someone yesterday, and I was told that, it's very hard for ex-political party to not do something because in its manifesto it promised to basically oppose said thing. And that's not how politics works. They're very capable of taking absolute U-turns.
yeah.
We have to understand what is the game being played, and we have to engage at it at that level instead of theorizing prematurely. Right? So, if a government changes, it stands to reason that the nature of its tendering will change. Different guys will gain. And the question is, why are they getting these tenders now, for example? Right? And one of the things which has happened in journalism is that the new definition of bravery in reporting has become to sort of call out the government in an opinion piece. And that is fatal because there is nothing that you can imagine or conceptualize in your head which will match up to the reality outside. There's a particular messiness to the world outside and a particular intricacy to it. It's only when we start looking closer at things that we realize exactly what is going on and why. And uh, the test of good reporting, right? Uh, it is not these awards or anything at all. It is, are you equal to the process you're reporting on? Or if you're better than the process you're reporting on, chance there might be impact. It's not a given, but every once in a while there will be impact in the sense that you will see something change, which will then keep you persevering with the next 9 reports which don't have impact at all. It's kind of like reading a very, very good book. It transports you. And then you plot through the next 9 books in the hope of a similar high. You don't find it, but you persevere because maybe the 11th book is going to give you that kind of a high, right? It's like reading The Snow Leopard, Matheson. So that's what it is. I've again rambled, but
that's I think a good enough positive note to end our discussion here. So thanks a lot for and thank you all for also being around for this long
and staying awake.
Yes. I was getting scared कि आप भी बहुत थक गए हो.
इसीलिए मैं चाय पी रहा था. अब मैं वाइन लेके नवल completely slurring word.
I think we can, like, if anyone has any questions to ask,
has any questions or
you could.
I just have one. It's a
just one thing. Everybody who asks a question gets an extra glass of wine.
What do we do if you don't have wine?
He'll drink it for you.
So congratulations on the book, and I hope this is one of the many launches that you have. It appears to be a very significant book. I've not read it yet. I will. I'm particularly interested to know. I want to know. You mentioned about the exams in Tamil Nadu. Did you see a pattern in other states also? What did you find out about education in Mizoram, and were you following this across all the 6 states?
No. What I was doing is, in every state, I made it a point to look at either education or healthcare. Okay. Just to see how are these basic developmental functions being delivered. So in Mizoram, I ended up looking at healthcare.
So besides Tamil Nadu, which other state did you look at in terms of education?
Education. So not Mizoram. I looked at education in Odisha, where I found a school will have 8 standards, but only 4 teachers. Okay. Yani ki, what that means in material terms is that standard 1 and standard 2 are sitting together in the same classroom. The teacher is teaching these kids for an hour, giving them an assignment, crossing over the aisle, teaching these kids for another hour, and crossing back. And Mizoram had a problem with not enough money, a cash flow problem. And therefore, they were not able to pay salaries on time to healthcare workers, and therefore, healthcare delivery was suffering. Odisha closes every year with a 5,000 crore surplus, but it doesn't have teachers. Right? You go to a Punjab, healthcare again in Punjab, but you find that there the situation is similar to Mizoram ki paisa nahi hai. Lekin paisa kyun nahi hai? In the case of Mizoram, Mizoram is a financially unviable state. Its own tax revenues are about 500 crores. The state runs on the 5,000 crores it gets from the center. Right? Punjab has financial resources. It's not collecting them because of the political party. Right? Then you go to Tamil Nadu. And Tamil Nadu, I looked at both education and healthcare because I wanted to understand the administrative reasons for state failure. See, how many times will I sort of, there's also this thing, right? I cannot go to every state and again say, yaar, yahan bhi education delivery nahi hoti and all of that, right? Once you diagnose the problem, you want to go a little deeper, right? So in Tamil Nadu, I tried to understand the administrative reasons for state failure. And I found this whole thing of trying to make the CM look good and the rest of it, right? And other factors like caste and whatever. Bihar, I looked at healthcare again with a little bit of a focus on education, but Bihar psyched me out. So there is the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. So the government has said कि 8th standard तक तो बेटा तो चिंता मत कर मैं तेरे लिए स्कूल बना देगा तो उन्होंने बना दिए ठीक है you would think that if the bottom of the pyramid is being broadened to create a lot of secondary schools, primary and secondary schools, right? Maybe the state government should build a commensurate number of schools for 10th and 11th and 12th, right? Bihar didn't do it. So the number of kids enrolled in a 11th standard classroom in Bihar can be as high as 3,500.
Oh.
In a classroom. Right? What that means is that obviously none of them is ever going to fit inside the school building alone. So these kids don't go to school. there's an unemployment problem in Bihar. So unemployed graduates are running quasi-unrecognized schools. And these kids get their education there, and they go to the school to give their exam. And then I went to Gujarat, where we all know that the state does very, very badly on HDI, human development parameters, right? But why? Money is not a problem. The bureaucracy is a very tightly controlled bureaucracy. It's not like Bihar, जहाँ पे कोई किसी की बात ही नहीं सुनता, right? So the administrative structure isn't a problem, finance is not a problem, but the healthcare indices are rubbish. And the reason was actually majoritarianism. The political parties predominantly the more financially better off communities, right? For them, the state should only provide electricity and basic infrastructure. Health, education, the community will provide for itself. So there will be student hostels, students' schools, healthcare, and that's the model Gujarat has followed. That the state has no function delivering basic developmental functions, only core infrastructure, and people will take care of the rest. What they miss, because of the majoritarian way of not looking at what the realities of minority might be, is that the Dalits, Muslims, and Adivasis cannot build their own schools and hospitals, right? And then you have a bunch of idiotic economists who come in, take this majoritarian bias and misread it as neoliberal economics or whatever, and Modi's radical reimagination of the state.
Yeah.
And they write pothas on this, right?
Which is basically just exclusion at the end of the day, nothing else.
Yeah.
Sure. You had something?
So I had a question on journalism. So like around the time of 2011 to 2016, I mean, our media houses like quite gotten like sold to the BJP and the other corporations, and then the online media came like the wire, print, and all those like scroll and all. But do you think that in the coming years, like 5 to 6 years, all these online media channels would also face the similar problems that currently the TV channels are facing, the TV media is facing?
In what way?
Currently, I think there's a online portal called the Athletic, which is getting like sold to an online betting corporation in America, because they're like not getting subscription, like subscribers are like are not paying for it. So, do you think the subscriber model, which I like currently follow, the news laundry or like why follow subscriber model, where the people would eventually pay for their own content, would just like would not be enough?
No, not really. I think, see, the thing is this, okay. I don't know how to answer this. In that, there are multiple ways of saying this. So, two broad points. One, if you look at the print model, the advertiser-driven model, right? Okay, so what I want to say is that I think the future for the reader-funded model is not dire at all. Okay, what we see, if you look at India right now, there are two newsrooms which have not fired people. The first is the Wire, the second is Caravan. Right? And one reason is that as their credibility has grown, more people have begun subscribing, because now, in bad times, you realize the importance of good journalism. Right? In that sense, this is a good movement where you have good journalism actually sort of proving itself as something which deserves investment, I suppose, at one level. I'm not phrasing this correctly. No, in terms of business proposition, you find that a good newsroom will attract money. The Hindu keeps sending me ads saying that, subscribe, and I would rather give that money to the Wire. The problem with the reader-driven model lies elsewhere, which is that, so there's a book called Post-Journalism, where the author says that the catch with the advertiser-driven model is that it always creates a bias towards entertainment within journalism, right? You don't really want to if I want to show you an ad for a shiny new car, I would prefer to not surround it with reports about deprivation and starvation, right? Mood खराब हो जाएगा. The problem with the reader-driven model is that it creates echo chambers. So if I'm supporting, let's say, giving money to the buyer, and the buyer is writing this positive story about something Adani is doing in renewable energy, it may not work so well, right? So the problem comes in there. So now there is one set of people who are subscribing to Op India and Swarajya, and that's their view of the world. Another set is subscribing to Wire, and then that's their view of the world. The neutral space, to some extent, gets missed. So models like, um, and that was one really great thing about newspapers, because they were this melting pot where all sorts of perspectives would still come into them. You know, so I'm not bearish about journalism in that sense, in terms of financial viability. I think it's a Darwinian period. And the other thing to remember with journalism is that it doesn't cost a lot to do journalism. You know, nothing compared. Like, actually, you don't know how much money do you need to run a newsroom? 15 crores in a year?
15 Sikkim में तो 15 crore makes of like century you'll run. But yeah,
Right. So even in a Delhi or something, at 15 crores isn't a large amount of money. You know, it can be raised. So in that sense, I'm optimistic. My concerns are about the echo chamber effect of it.
yes, please.
Oh, I had a question about the kleptocracy that seems to be plaguing India. Your solution to it, actually, you said, the solution would be to come together as one initially, right? Essentially, sorry. Did you?
No. So to improve democratic practice is one thing. But the thing is also this, that kleptocracy leads directly to inequality. And there's a book called The Great Leveler which makes this point that inequality is one of the hardest problems in a society to solve. Okay. It's come down globally only because of plagues, large wars, whatever. You know, it creates an intensifying cycle. The kleptocrat supports the political party which benefits it. And opposition gets harder and harder.
Yeah, but how do you solve it in a country that's one, very diverse, and two, also divided? Not only in terms of cultures, not only in terms of religion, but also in terms of class.
I don't think I really have an answer to that. I mean, okay, so if you look at countries like the US, they went through a kleptocratic phase, right? And at some point, the antitrust laws were passed, and they broke those monopolies, right? So something similar is now being tried with Google and the rest of it too, right? So it can be done. It has to become a political issue. People have to realize that these large monopolies are starving a lot of other companies for growth and survival, right? And then it has to become an issue. But for that, we have to first understand that this is a problem. Adani winning airports and ports all over the place is not simply a case of the government favoring it. It's also a question of one huge monopoly taking shape, which all of us need to fully understand what it's going to mean. Right? And that's the function of the press, to sort of make all of this visible and palpable. So on this point, there's one book I'm going to show you. One sec. This one. This is a really great book on journalism, on how the antitrust laws came into being. Let's now shill every single book.
Yeah. Anyone else has queries?
Maybe I've talked about it, I'm not sure. If you have, you don't have to answer this. It's about the title of the book. It's quite provocative in the sense that it makes one wonder that you probably want to talk about the fact that despite all corruptions, all the bad things that's happening that you talked about, the state still survives. And I see a lot of hope in the title, in the sense that it still survives. Probably you thought about how people react to what the state is doing. Probably, I don't know. I mean, have you ever thought about this, that you should also talk to the people, capture their experiences of negotiating with the state? Uh, Maybe you have. I don't know. I mean, probably that's one. The other is you talk about the states. I mean, good thing about the selection of your state is you didn't go by political parties to approve
Yeah.
states. You had different criteria. But I was wondering why, probably, if you had taken Delhi also, that would have really added value, because Delhi is one state which stands out. The education reforms that the Delhi government has taken up has remarkably worked. The health infrastructure has remarkably improved. I mean, there's some good things about this state to talk about, probably, and that would probably also have given some hope.
Okay, so two things, right? So on the first point, every time there is heavy rain in Bombay and we get that thing about the spirit of the city and so on, that point of view sort of underwhelms me. Yes, people do live despite the state, right? And they do manage and they survive. But the thing is that they survive at a huge cost to themselves. Instead of leading a fully articulated, expressed life, so much of your effort goes into staying alive. And that is, I think, a more specific point that I want to make with the title. So, the migrant crisis, right? There was a state failure. People survived. But the cost of it was extraordinary. All of these people walking back home, all of that. And I think that is what I would rather focus on. That none of us actually is able to lead the fullest life we are capable of, because so much of this inefficiency in the system, it reduces us into expending a lot of effort in just staying where we are. And then progress, etc., can happen. But it's a fairly draining thing to live under a very extractive, exploitative state. So, point one. Two, I would have really loved to look at a Delhi and a Kerala. Okay. The reason I did not is that I initially thought, and this is ignorance speaking, right? I initially thought this would be a 15-month project, right? Because when you don't know what you're getting into, you have your own spectacular timelines. And then you go in, and then you realize कि boss, 3 स्टेट हुए हैं, तीसरे के तुमने आर्टिकल लिखे नहीं है अभी, 1 साल हो गया है. And then, but there was also this realization that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? So I kept plodding, but by the end of the 33rd month, I was like, and I would have people saying that, Shekhar, we hope you will not stop after these 6, keep going. And I would always blanch inside at that thought. That I kind of answered the questions I had started out with. And now it seemed like a good time to stop and start focusing on other questions. Right, so I think there is that too. That how much time do you want to give to the specific questions that you are sort of entertaining in your head? By the end of Gujarat, it kind of felt like I'd answered the questions I had in my head when I started out. And then I was like, ab ho gaya, ab main jaake, I'm going to get into under my dining table and adopt the fetal position and stay like that.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Since we talked about how industrialists come and favor the politicians that will in turn favor them, can you also talk about the rise of electoral bonds? How it's going to change the landscape of
No, I didn't hear the first part of your sentence. I think it's your mask. It's
So, since you're talking about industrialists and how they help politicians, and
It's a toxic symbiotic relationship. Please comment on the rise of electoral bonds also, and how they're going to be changing the landscape of democracy in India.
I'm never sure how seriously to take them. So let's just think about this a little logically. All right. Um, what even today the vast amount of money political parties gather is still illegitimate money. It's not. It's informal money. It's not formal money. What you get through electoral bonds is formal money, right? Money that you can show in your annual report. I would tend to think that the informal money will still be about 90% of their overall collections, right? And so the question for me is a different question. My question is, given that you're pulling in so much of informal money anyway, what has happened for you to need more formal finance than before? What do you need formal finance for? Right? And that isn't an answer I've received really so far. I haven't looked at it either. But one hypothesis that was put forward by some people in Hyderabad is that as parties' expenditure on social media is rising, you cannot pay Facebook with like suitcases of cash, no? Huh. So something is happening in our politics where you need more formal finance than before for a certain set of applications. And that is why some of this is being taken. So if you look at the electoral bonds sold, right, in an election, it may be 15,000 crores or 8,000 crores or something. We know the money spent is multiples of that. But there is something specific for which you need this kind of cash. So what heads of expenditure campaigning need formal finance? And we touched on this, and I said that I would come back to this. But a lot of states have welfare databases, right? So it was one of those brilliant ideas these morons had, where they sort of said that instead of letting the Panchayati Raj institutions or the local officials tell us who should be the beneficiaries of these projects, of these welfare programs, because there is favoritism and corruption in those in any case. So we'll centralize and clean this up by creating a database of all families in the state and identifying their core characteristics. A woman, a household headed only by a woman, a household headed by a woman who's over 60, right? Whatever set of parameters. And then whenever we want to run a program, a welfare program, we just search along the parameters we want to focus on and we get a list of beneficiaries, right? This is the welfare beneficiary database, and a lot of states have these now. What parties have begun doing is taking that database and running their own personal surveys trying to gauge the political affiliation of these households. And then you start customizing reach through these programs. And one of the things the BJP is supposed to have done is take these databases and link it to people's social media profiles. So if I know what is your political persuasion and I know your WhatsApp number, I can then start customizing my messaging to you. You are, let's say, 22, 10th pass, Yadav in Bihar, unemployed. I will run a particular kind of social media content directed at you. Right? So these are also underway, and we don't understand these things well enough yet. See, now I'm keeping the best for the last. Please.
Sir, I have a question. You mentioned that democracy, it's very easy to point out the problem is democracy sometimes. But then do you think, sir, in a country like India...
यार राजशेखर बोलना यार सर क्या होता है मैं इतना बुढ़ा लग रहा हूँ
Rajshekhar, my question would be, so in a country like India, say the democracy allows the people to choose their leader. So they would ideally choose a leader who is like them. So basically, in a state like Bihar, where a Kanhaiya Kumar loses the election to a person like Gujarat Singh? Is it because of the people and their choice of leader and their representative? If the people themselves were more educated and they thought about policy and how it can help, how the service of governance can actually change their life, if they had that knowledge, only then could they actually choose a leader who could bring about that change, perhaps. So, do you think that democracy, yes, it is the ideal situation, but for a country like India, where especially the states like Bihar and all, do you think it is something that is really benefiting the people altogether?
Too aspirational. No. So, okay, so 2008, okay, I spent 8 months living in two villages in Madhya Pradesh. Okay, I was studying the village level impact of an agribusiness. It was again uh, one village near Indore, the other near Bhopal. My choosing parameter for the house families I would stay with was whether they had a toilet or not. Okay, but the big thing I learned from those 8 months is that there is zero correlation between intelligence and education. All right, and so I don't think I would attribute the kind of election results that you get in a Bihar to lack of education. Okay, what you get there is a system where um, it's a state which is fully incapable of delivering anything to you as a citizen. So, in such a scenario, people start banding together into the kind of kinship structure which has the best chance of giving them benefits. Right? In the case of Bihar, that is caste. And so, in Bihar, what you find is that voting is very strongly determined by caste lines. And so, even a Kanhaiya Kumar, a very promising orator, one of the brighter new, maybe political leaders to come up, he won't win against Giriraj Singh because the local caste dynamics are still going to determine who wins. Right? That is one of the bigger things that I learned. That when you have when you have rising insecurity in people's lives, given that the state is absent, they will fall back on kinship structures which can protect them. Kinship structures are either going to be religious or they're going to be caste based. And that is what you're seeing, right? I was talking to Ghanshyam Shah in Gujarat, and he connected this dot magnificently for me. He said, look, you know that if there is trouble in your life, the state isn't, there's no social safety net for you. The only thing which is going to save you is your samudaya, your community. But to get support from my community, I have to first be a Adarsh member of my community. Right? I cannot be sort of, making friends with Muslims and having chicken every evening in the terrace of my house and then tell the Patel community, help me, right? So this is a disciplining mechanism. So this is one reason why religion is becoming more and more overtly practiced now. आप गणेश पूजा खाली घर में अब नहीं करेंगे. You're also going to make a big song and dance of taking that idol from the market to your house with a band and a baja and the rest of it. And then similar pomp when you take it off for immersion. It's becoming more performative. Right? And that is again one of those dots that got connected in terms of, in my head, why is religiosity so overt now? So to go back to what you're saying, I think the problem is the insecurity, and one reason this insecurity is rising is really sizably about rising inequality in this country. And we again know where that emerges from.
So, yes. And now Raman is saying no more questions. And if anyone has any queries, I'm sure, Rajshekhar is around, so after you can ambush him. He's staying here as well, so you can keep him late. So, thanks a lot.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
everyone. This was fun after a long time.
Thank you, everyone. No, this has been fun. I mean, I've only been doing these wretched things on Zoom till now, and I'm so tired of them. So